So our next speaker this afternoon is Saskya Hunter from GHD. Saskya's 20-plus year career in process engineering has taken her across Australia and the UK, working in both public and private sectors. She's always been interested in innovation and was tasked with establishing GHD's internal innovations program in Queensland almost a decade ago. Since that time, she's branched out into the delivery of innovation services and expanding her skills in commercialisation of new technology through working closely with startups and small to medium enterprises across the engineering sector. She's now in the role of market leader for GHD Digital in Queensland and is relishing the steep learning curve with the challenge of bringing together domain and digital experts to create new solutions to industry problems. Saskya will present on digital disruption is everywhere. How can the water industry respond? New digital technology is everywhere, and convergence of factors means the rate of technology change is occurring at a pace never before seen in human history. Saskya poses a number of questions related to this, so please welcome Saskya Hunter.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. In fact, it's a real honour, and I think going back 12 months ago, if somebody had said to me that I would be standing here in front of you in Hobart speaking to you about this particular topic, I probably wouldn't have believed them. This time last year, I was still firmly a member of the water team in Brisbane. Despite my work in the innovation space, that was sort of a sideline that I enjoyed and dabbled in. But I was very much firmly involved in project delivery and key client relationship management in the water team. But then as things go, a few stars aligned for me and an opportunity came up to join the digital team and to create that business from scratch. So I seized that opportunity and since then have been on a thrilling ride and a new learning journey. And now as I stand here nearly 12 months later looking back on that journey, I'm amazed at how far I've been able to come personally, but I'm also frequently reminded that not everybody's had the benefit of the journey that I've been on, and that there are many things that we need to do as a collective to respond to the changes going on around us, this so-called digital disruption. So, what are the factors that are bringing about this, driving this digital disruption that we're seeing? There are 4 key things, as you can see. We've heard lots today, and I'm sure you're all aware of many new digital technologies that are coming onto the market. Every day there's something new to hear about, to learn about. But those technologies are only being enabled by the fact that the cost of computing is coming down rapidly and has been for the last decade or more, but at an ever-accelerating pace. And a classic example of that, of course, is your mobile phone. If you think about all the functionality that you have on your phone, not only do you have a phone, but you have a camera, you have the internet, you have a video conferencing facility, a GPS, the list goes on. When you look at the cumulative cost of all of those technologies at the time that they were delivered onto the market, and you look at the equivalent cost today, you've got close to $1 million worth of value in what is now maybe a $1,000 handset. So the cost of computing and all of the things that are possible is coming down rapidly. And then, of course, we're seeing the evolution of lots of new different business models. Someone this morning touched on the sharing economy, which, of course, is novel. Then there are things like subscription-based services now that are more and more common. Think of apps on your phone, free apps. You don't have to pay for software anymore, but then you buy things once you're in the app or in the software. I've even heard of cases where people give out their software for free, but when that person's customers then use the software, it's the customers who are paying to use the software that pays for the software back to the vendor. So there's lots of different things coming out, new ways of creating revenue that are coming onto the market. And of course all of this is being underpinned by the massive proliferation of the internet, and not only in its spread and its reach across the globe, but also in its speed. Change is the only constant. This is something I talk to my kids about at home. I say, nothing ever stays the same for very long, so appreciate the moment. Whether it's a schoolyard friendship group or, on a global scale as the new world order, nothing ever stays the same for very long. Appreciate the moment, get ready for the fact that it won't last for that long, and get ready for the change. But as engineers and scientists, we're used to dealing with new technology and adopting new technology, facing new challenges all the time. But it could be argued that we're facing a unique set of challenges now that are unprecedented in their scale, their speed, and their impact. It's due to our hyper-connected world that the impact of change can be felt, the impact of change and the disruption that it causes ripples across the world in almost no time at all. There's no way to hide. There's no safe corners anymore, except although Tasmania is quite appealing occasionally, but even here, I know that you feel the same impacts that we do anywhere else. It's also worth noting that disruption can and will come from the most unexpected places. It's not going to be another water company that disrupts us here. It could be a startup, it could be a software company, it could be a robotics company, it could be something else we haven't conceived of yet. But it's worth saying, and I want to say, that digital disruption doesn't have to mean digital destruction. Yes, we've all heard about the Kodak moment, and Blockbuster, for example, has fizzled. But when you also think about the massive amount of creativity that's been brought about by digital disruption in the last 10 or 20 years, it's mind-blowing. You think about the value that has been created by companies like Airbnb, Tesla, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple, all those companies, they are hugely, they have created so much value in the world and transformed the way that we live our lives and we do business and we interact with each other. And the value, as it's measured on the stock exchanges, is of course huge. Apple's now $1 trillion company. So digital disruption doesn't have to mean destruction. It can also mean huge amount of creation and opportunity. So how do we prepare ourselves to seize the opportunities that are afforded to us by digital disruption? So picking off business models and ways of working first, I heard something at a conference earlier this year that was really resonated with me and made a whole lot of things make more sense. And I was told that digital disruption occurs when the value that is created is divorced from the assets that are involved. So I'm going to say it again. Digital disruption occurs when the value that's created is divorced from the assets that are involved. And so classic examples are Airbnb, and it was talked about this morning. Airbnb, big, accommodation chain, doesn't own any hotels. Uber, transport company, doesn't own any cars. Facebook, media company, doesn't create any content. So you get the gist. The water industry is a very asset-intensive industry, obviously, and in the past that has been a barrier to new entrants. But we need to think that this may not be so in the future. We need to think, as individuals and particularly as companies, what is the value that we are providing to our customers? What business are we really in? So for some people, some companies, that will just be providing a basic service at the lowest cost. Others, that will be delivering and managing infrastructure. For others, it's about lifestyle and economic enablement. So it can be lots of different things, but what is it for you and your customers? Traditionally in the water sector, we've looked at other industries, like particularly the electricity industry and the communications sectors, to look at trends and evolution and things that could happen and translate into the water sector. So things that are evolving and emerging in those industries include things like peer-to-peer trading. There are platforms now available where people can sell energy to each other from their solar panels. They don't need to involve the middleman. Micro power grids. People are creating their own power grids now where they weren't able to be effectively developed or provided before. And also private communications networks. Campbell Newman this morning was talking about farmers needing their own private communication networks to cover their properties. We're seeing that in airports and things at the moment. They're all creating their own private communication networks, private Wi-Fi and so on. So the divorcing of the value that's occurring is being enabled by a few different things. The key one for me is the rise in the digital platform. Platforms where people can match and exchange goods, services, and even social currency. And the other thing is the trend towards self-service. I mean, whether it's a business-to-consumer transaction or a business-to-business transaction, people are people don't want to pay the middleman anymore, and there are many more ways now that we can cut the middleman out of activities, and they certainly don't want to pay for things that they don't need. So, in terms of disruption in the water industry, I think we should not be asking ourselves, can we be disrupted, but we should be really thinking, how can we be disrupted? And then if we think about the ways of working, in the digital world, people talk about CX and UX. That's the customer experience and the user experience. The user experience is users are your staff, your suppliers, anyone that you have a business relationship with, that you have interactions with. And really, you need to dig deep into all those experiences. And of course, as a water industry, we've been talking about the customer experience journey for a long time now. But if you dig deep into that and into the user experience and find out where the friction lies, because wherever there's friction, there's a problem. And wherever there's a problem, there's an opportunity for somebody else to come and fix it for you. Now, we don't really want that. We want to disrupt ourselves before someone else comes and does it for us. So you need to have a really hard look at how do you remove the friction from all of your processes. And the other thing in terms of the ways of working, I strongly believe that we really need to start thinking about reframing the contractual models of the past. As the pace of change increases, it's going to be impossible for individual organisations to have all of the answers. There's going to be a need for a host of strategic partnerships to be created and a move to a much more collaborative and co-creation type relationships. And we've seen examples of that today with SA Water talking about different collaborative commercial frameworks. And co-creation was touched on this morning as well in the breakfast session with Chiara. But co-creation is not a new concept, and nor is collaboration for that matter, and we do it in lots of different ways. But there are some fundamentals around changes in behaviour and changes in commercial frameworks. And we did see that in the SA Water example as well, that they're the two things that they've considered. I want to take it a step further and say that co-creation is about, it's not just about delivering projects necessarily, but it's also about delivering tools and products and things that then can be shared more widely. And I also think that there needs to be a distinct shift, and there will be a distinct shift from the much more traditional master-slave type relationships and contractual engagements, where there's high value prize to be won. On that list, we've heard a lot about technical solutions today, and if anything off that list, the technical solutions are probably the easiest to pick off. So yes, we've already got lots of new tools to help us solve old wicked problems, and they're also creating new possibilities. Things that we could never do before are now possible with drones or with different types of laser scanning or different sensors, you name it. And they really open up a whole new world for us in terms of how we manage our assets and our resources. But in particular, they allow us to be much better informed about risk. But along with those tools, I think that's incumbent on us then to start looking and challenging some long-held truths, things that we need to re-examine. We have fundamental assumptions about how we design and manage our infrastructure. We have fundamental ways that we've always thought about looking at demand forecasting, for example, and so on, just to pick a few. So I think we really need to start unpacking those and thinking about how we could do things differently. What information would we need to be able to still achieve the same outcome, but remove those assumptions that maybe don't have a fundamental basis anymore? And then what information do we need to make that happen? Because that's when you just get into the tools and things that possibly already exist. And finally, but the most critical of all, is the people side of things. How do we prepare ourselves as individuals and organisations? Obviously, new skills are going to be needed. People who have much more knowledge about how to manage data, how to process data, how to interpret data, computing, and of course technical knowledge about all of the new equipment that's coming onto the market. So that's a no-brainer. But what I think is also going to be really important is people who have what I call interpretive skills. people who can translate from the digital world into, say, the engineering and scientific world, and vice versa, but also who can communicate that information to senior management and others in decision-making positions. So those interpretive skills are incredibly difficult to learn, and they're not something that you can just pick up at university. So as organisations, we're going to be faced with extra challenge in terms of developing people who have those skills relevant to the businesses that we're in. And I also think that we need to really be fostering a learning and growth mindset. My children are learning about growth mindset and the work of Carol Dweck at primary school, which is really fascinating to me that that kind of philosophy is finding its way into schools. The other thing that struck me is I was speaking to a software company founder earlier this year, and he says that in his business, he expects his staff to spend a minimum of 1 hour per day learning about software, updates, changes, things that are relevant to their business, because things are changing so fast in his space that if they don't spend an hour a day learning and keeping up, they won't have a business in a very short amount of time. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can all go and spend an hour a day every day in our businesses to learn, but what is really fundamentally important is that we start moving more towards that, understanding that we need to try and learn something new every day, and that we need to share it with other people. And fundamentally, it's also not about just, I'll talk about that later, but so it's really important that we start thinking about how we have that learning mindset. And also, it's not possible for any organisation to have the full solution to any problem. I think we have to really fundamentally accept that we all only have part of the solution because we only have part of the perspective. And so I think to enable us to become better at problem solving, we're going to have to develop not just multidisciplinary engineering teams or scientific teams, but cross-functional problem-focused teams. And by cross-functional, I think we need to get better at bringing in people who have a legal mind, who have financial people, marketing people, customer relationship people, any of those people who need to come in and help us to solve a problem. And we put them together to solve that problem, and then we disband. And then we're forming and disbanding teams as needed to solve problems. So not just projects, but much more meatier problems. So, to summarise, how do we thrive? What are we going to do? So there's 3 things I would say. One is to question everything. Take a really long, hard look at everything you do and ask yourself why. What value is this adding? Why am I doing it this way? How could I do it differently? So that you can start to position yourself to disrupt yourself before somebody else comes and does it for you. Secondly, I would say be curious. We're all born with an innate curiosity as babies and children. So foster that curiosity and start that learning journey and develop that learning mindset. And I would say to you, don't just look at what we do in the water industry, but actively go and look at other industries, other examples, and other completely, potentially unrelated fields of knowledge, because it's incredible what you can learn and just the little nuggets that you find that you can actually implement just to give that point of difference, and that might unlock a problem for you. And finally, don't be afraid to try new ways of working. So if it's a collaboration piece or it's a co-creation piece or something else, don't be afraid to give it a go with trusted partners. The key is to start small, and then once you've cracked the nut, scale fast. So, success for me at the end of this presentation. I'm hoping that you will think about something that I've said, maybe tomorrow or even next week. I'd be really happy if you did that. I'd be ecstatic if you decided that you might share something I've said with somebody else or even a few other colleagues. And finally, the icing on the cake would be is that if we all left this forum and went and did something different tomorrow and next week and next month, that helped prepare you and your organisation for the digital disruption that is certainly coming our way. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Saskia. I have a feeling there might be some questions for Saskia. Tim has one.
Saskia, So many of the high-profile case studies of disruption, when you talk about the separation of the value from the asset, so much of that comes from the value ends up being created by someone else. It comes from outside, never owned the assets in the first place, not bound up in that legacy. In the work that you've done, have you ever found, can you name case studies where the asset owners have effectively disrupted to create value in a different way as we would have to as a water sector?
I can't think of any examples yet, but I think many people are only just starting on that journey and starting to think about it in that way. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, so particularly in the water sector, most of what I'm seeing is that people are doing what we've seen today, which they're taking certain technologies where they can see value and they can see an immediate use for it, and so they're adopting technologies and so on. I haven't seen any examples yet, but if anybody has, it'd be great to share them, of people who are actually looking at it from a different perspective, like that, and saying, well, how do we disrupt ourselves in a much broader way? So no, I haven't got any examples I can share with you yet.
The only one that I could think of that I've heard recently is News Corp, that I think have actually done a pretty astounding job to shift their business completely while so many others around them die. Yeah. And they seem to be growing in the digital world. But I can't think of them generally otherwise. But
yeah, there aren't very many outstanding examples of people who've done it to themselves. That's true. Yeah.
Any other questions? I was actually thinking, Saskya, well, if you were a budding entrepreneur and you thought, I want to disrupt someone's business and I want to make some money for myself, do you have any thoughts as to what you might do, where you might start?
Well, I would do what I said, which is to have a look at the customer experience and user experience and find out where all the problems are. Where the things aren't working well, where your customers aren't happy, where there's friction, where something's just really difficult to do, and then get in there, because that's really where that's the front door. That's the easy, low-hanging fruit. Yeah.
Might be opportunities. There's a question, Dharma?
No, this is not a question. I'm trying to give a partial answer to Tim's question. There are disruption happening in the water industry, especially third-party access to our assets. Say in Scotland, you can purchase the water from Thames Water in London. They will deliver the water in Scotland. So your assets are no longer going to be yours. Nice. Your assets will be shared among others. So this is starting.
That's almost like peer-to-peer trading amongst water companies, isn't it? As opposed to individuals.
And also in Melbourne, water trading is happening between farmers. They can sell their licenses to the neighbor if he doesn't want to use for that particular season. So if he needs X amount of water to produce rice, and if the rainfall is going to be small, so he might think that I might give that water to somebody else and take the cash. That is happening for the last 15, 20 years in Victoria. So,
I mean, it's not inconceivable that, a time could come easily in the urban environment where people can have water credits, for example. If they don't use their allocation of water, they can sell it to their neighbour and they can use extra. It's exactly what you've described. But, in an urban environment, why couldn't that happen?
Even a few years' time, you might get
that's not far away.
waterless toilets, so your assets will be gone.
Yeah, and there are many platforms that have been delivered, already in the energy sector that could easily be translated to the water sector to allow that sort of thing to happen. You don't have to physically move water around, I guess is the point. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Okay.